This is episode number 128, featuring the amazing Josh Elliott.
This is the PleinAir podcast with Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. In the PleinAir podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhodes.
Well, thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the PleinAir podcast. My name is Eric. I'm looking forward to this fall. We've got Fall Color Week in September. We're going to be painting in Ghost Ranch, where Georgia O'Keeffe painted. It's going to be really a wonderful trip. That's at fallcolorweek.com. You can learn. We're also doing a trip to Provence, south of France, the trail and area of Cezanne and Van Gogh and others. And then we're going to go to Edinburgh, Scotland. And that's not a painting trip. It's a behind-the-scenes art trip we do with Fine Art Connoisseur, my other magazine. But if you want to go, it's great because we always get great privileges, great access, see things that nobody else ever sees. It's a fun trip, and we don't have a lot of those seats left because it's coming up in October, but there are a couple. Anyway, you can grab one of them. If you're single or you're a couple, you're all welcome. We have single people, we have couples. It's not a painter trip. I want to emphasize that. Some of us do go out and paint. I always paint a little bit. And then we are going to do a little pre-trip, painting trip in advance for the people who are coming. Not sure where we're going yet, but we're working on that. Anyway, you can grab information about that at finearttrip.com. finearttrip.com. Well, we had a wild ride since the PleinAir convention in San Francisco. We're now at, get this, drum roll please, 92% of this year's attendance is already signed up for next year. 92%. That's with 11 months to go. Denver and Colorado is hot. We're going to be painting in Estes Park and the Rocky Mountain National Park. We're going to be painting at Red Rocks in Denver, a lot of really amazing places. This one's going to sell out very early, and the hotel is almost already sold out. Now, we send you the hotel information once you get your registration because we're not sending it out in advance because people book rooms and then they don't keep them, and then we get cancellations at the last minute. Of course, Scott Christensen is one of our keynotes, and Kwang Ho, one of our keynotes, two major artists that are on stage, and Scott is doing a pre-convention workshop. So this is amazing. Also, watercolor star Thomas Schaller, one of the greats, is also doing a pre-convention workshop. So there's a watercolor workshop and there's an oil painting PleinAir workshop. And you can register for all this stuff at pleinairconvention.com. And coming up after the interview, I'm going to be answering some art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. But first, one of the painters I've been really looking forward to interviewing because I think he's such an amazing communicator with paint, such a delicate painter, not a delicate person, mind you, but delicate in terms of he's just got this sensitivity to his paintings that they just kind of, they say that they're peaceful or something. There's something about them. Anyway, I'm honored to have Josh Elliott. Josh Elliott, welcome to the PleinAir podcast.
Thanks, Eric. Pleasure to be here.
So tell everybody where you hail from, and for those who don't really know your work yet, tell them what you do.
Okay, I live in Helena, Montana, and I paint landscapes of Montana, but also of the desert Southwest. And I guess it is mostly landscapes, and I try to vary that as much as I can within the genre of landscape.
And why Montana? Is this where you grew up?
Yeah, I was born in Montana, and then I've been all over the West. And then my wife and I returned. She's from Montana as well, and we returned to Montana in 2003. We were living in Oregon at the time.
A big difference.
Yeah. Montana always felt like home, but I think I had to go away from home to realize that.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah.
So what do you recall as your first exposure to recognizing art or artists?
Well, my dad is an artist. He's Steve Elliott is his name, and he was an emergency room doctor until 45, and retired early to paint full time. And so art was just a part of our life growing up. We had paintings on the walls and sculptures on all the nightstands and tables, and he would build a house with a studio in mind every time. Even though he wasn't doing art when he was practicing medicine, he always wanted to have a space for that. So was in his studio a lot growing up. And me and my two brothers both were, or all were. So my exposure to art came from him, and his dad exposed him to art. He was also dabbled in a lot of art, although never became a professional artist.
So I just want to probe that just a little bit. Your dad
Yeah.
was a physician,
Yes.
and he quit his job and became a full-time artist?
Yeah, and his parents were thrilled about that, even though he was out of the house. But they're so proud of him being a doctor. But I think his dad was also proud that he did it because he always wanted to make a go of art and was never able to. So yeah, it was a big leap, but yeah, I think he was a lot happier. He was a great doctor, but there was a lot to do with medicine that wasn't for him so much.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we have a lot of doctors who come to our events, the PleinAir convention and some of the events that I do. And, a lot of them were very passionate about it at one time. As a matter of fact, Carl Bretsky retired from being a physician and became a full-time artist. And, that's probably really hard to do because most physicians make a lot of money.
Right.
And yet, you get to a point in any career where it's like been there, done that. And if you're not happy with it, it's a good thing to move on.
Yeah, I think so. And then just also thinking about this dream and living with what if, I think it'd be really difficult.
Well, you have the ability, since you started out as an artist, you can quit your job as an artist and become a physician.
Yeah, I don't think I'd get hired too often, but I'd give it a shot, I guess. I don't know. Darn regulations, right?
Yeah, those darn regulations. Well, I do brain surgery and, heart surgery, whatever you need done.
I'll charge half what everyone else is charging.
Oh, that's good. and we don't have any statistics yet, but half of my people don't make it, I'm sure.
That's right.
But you'll save money.
That's right. Yeah, that's true.
So was there a point at which you said, "Yeah, I want to do this full time and be like Dad and Grandpa," or what?
Well, it's funny. It was never a clear path. I just think wherever I was always doing it. I was always sketching in high school, and then when I went to college, I saw the course catalog, and I signed up for all the art classes, and then found out you had to take core classes as well. So. But I never declared art as a major. I just loved all the, printmaking and painting and sculpture. And I took all those. That was at the University of Idaho. And so I think, and then just kind of followed the path where it led. I wanted to be in film for a while, but then decided that wasn't for me. At that point, I'm going a little fast here, but I was going to school. This was in Montana State University. I went to their film program. So I went to 3 different universities and not one degree, but so I was going for film school there, and I was also painting on the side already. I started painting with my dad a little bit and decided that this painting is pretty great because I don't have to collaborate. Materials are pretty cheap. I don't have to beg for money to get the project going, and I just love the immediacy of it, and being out was fantastic.
So you were going to become a film producer? Is that what the deal was?
I always thought it'd be cinematographer, behind the camera, composing shots, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, similar art, really.
Yes, yeah. And I love film and I love movies, but yeah, the painting scratched the same itch, but I think it's even a better fit. I love being outside and hiking the beautiful mountain lakes and seeing our national parks.
So how long have you been painting now?
Let's see, it is probably almost 23 years.
Yeah. So I had a dialogue a long time ago. I was at a dinner party with Fred Ross from the Art Renewal Center and Jacob Collins and Peter Trippi, who actually is first time I met him was there, who's the editor of Fine Art Connoisseur. And this
Right.
conversation ensued about can someone become a great artist if they don't start young? And at the time, Jacob, I don't know how he feels today, but at the time he said, you got to start when you're 15, 18, 20 years old, and only then will you have enough time to really develop and become a great artist. So you're kind of living proof of that, and for your age, the quality of your work just feels like somebody who's been painting for 40 or 50 years.
Oh, well, thanks, Eric. Yeah, I don't know if I subscribe to that belief. I know that you get a head start maybe, and maybe you're thinking about art in a different way. I'm not sure. My wife is a music teacher, and she teaches a lot of kids. She teaches violin. And so when it definitely helps them. And maybe at a certain point, to be technically proficient, maybe you need to start young. But like you said, when you mentioned, my dad, I feel is a great artist, and he started at 45, even though he was kind of messing around with art before that. I just think, that expression, I think the expression is the most important thing. The technique will catch up,
Well, that's right. And quite frankly, you and I have both met artists who started in their 50s or 60s who are brilliant artists. So,
right.
I think he was kind of talking about figurative work and,
right.
Very tight realism and so on. But it's hard to know. I think, each person, I certainly don't want to discourage anybody. I certainly started late.
Right. Well, and great is subjective, right? I mean, who's saying great?
That's right. So what is it about painting that cranks your clock? Why do you do this?
It's just, I think it is just my love of the landscape and being outdoors and the beauty that surrounds us. I always felt so fortunate. When my dad is the one who taught me to paint, basically, and when we would drive up to Rocky Mountain National Park, and then you see this beauty that surrounds you, and there's just this intense feeling of like I have to do something about it, and then being able to paint, you get to do something about it, and then it just to turn it into, I guess, poetry or your feelings about what you're seeing, and I think is that conveyance of emotion. And to share that with someone else is really significant, and it's a real gift.
You mentioned Rocky Mountain National Park. As you know, we're taking the PleinAir convention out to Denver in 2020, and
awesome.
We're going to the Rocky Mountain National Park, and I drove into the park to kind of figure out where we're going to do some of our painting, and the spot. I took this one curve, and there's that Bierstadt painting of this mountain range that is so consuming, it just blows you away. And I remember the emotion of that moment of seeing that, you take this corner and it's there, and it's the most spectacular scene you've ever seen in your lifetime. And I thought, how could you possibly capture that emotion in paint? And, that moment when it just hits you in the face.
Right.
And I'll bet you figured out how to do that, haven't you?
Oh, no, I just feel like it's, each individual painting is only a snippet of what I feel about some of them. And you just hope that some of that is just captured. I think that human emotion, I don't think there's any formula for, putting that across. But I know what you're saying. I mean, just that is exactly it. When you see something like that, it's just this overwhelming stirring inside you that just gets you excited. And don't you feel fortunate that you can say something about it?
Oh, absolutely. But I think that brings up a really good point. Is I don't think it's about formula,
right?
And I think that we all get to this point where I think we should all get to the point where painting becomes human nature, where you don't have to think about it anymore. You can just respond to what you're seeing. And then, so you go through this process at an early stage of your painting life where, it's like playing the piano where you have to look at the keys and kind of massage your fingers into the right place. But after you've been doing for a while, you just look at the music and you play. And if you're lucky, you don't even have to do that. And I think that to capture that emotion, though, it's about that response to the scene. How do you capture your response to a scene? What is your I hate to say process, but
Yeah.
what's it like for you? Do you get out there and energetically just attack it? Do you sit and stare at the spot for an hour? What's your process like?
I think it varies. I mean, if it's an outdoor, if I'm outside painting, then it is the first thing I respond to, and it also depends on the situation. Like if I'm with other people, I'll set up wherever they want to set up, and find something. But it is the first thing I respond to. Typically in the studio, it's more of a thought process of coming up with an idea, a solid idea, and some of those, I have a handful of ideas rolling around in my head, just waiting for the right time to paint them. But so I think it is almost a flash of inspiration, and then figuring out how I'm going to do it. If I rearrange the scene a little bit, or if I'm going to focus on this part of the scene, or keep it muted in these colors, or it becomes logistics after that, but trying to maintain that initial inspiration.
I've seen a lot of your paintings. I have some friends who have them in their collections, and I had not seen any of them in person prior to that. And there's there's a sense of solitude that I get. Is that intentional? Because it's like when you stare at your pieces, it's almost like peace kind of comes over you. Is there something that you're trying to say when you're doing that, or is that just kind of coming out? Maybe it's just because of whoever's beholding it in a different way.
Right. Yeah. No, I've heard that from other people too. That I have they are a sense of quiet. Maybe it's the vastness I paint. I'm not sure, or just the lack of. I guess I have a lot of paintings that have human activity, but very few with actual figures in them. So I would say maybe that lends itself to that, but it's not, I think, an intentional thing to be quiet or peaceful, but maybe that's how I feel. Well, it's funny when I say maybe that's how I feel when I'm painting. That's not always the case, that's for sure. Yeah, that deadline staring at you in the face,
Yeah, well, that's the business part of things getting in the way, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
So what's that bit? And when did you become an actual professional where you started selling your work?
Well, when I started out painting, it was right after we got married, and we moved to Oregon, and I didn't have plans for any other job but painting in the garage, and I definitely was not making a living then. And my wife was a middle school orchestra teacher, and we were living off of her income. So it took 6 years to get it going. And then when we moved back to Montana, that was at that end of that 6 years when things just turned around and I was able to do it. I was showing work in Oregon and some in Montana at that time, and having some success. But when you're selling a 9x12 for $150, it's tough to make a living. So.
Yeah, well, I would imagine so. So, talk to me a little bit about teaching and about working with students. Are you doing any of that at the moment?
No, and I've taught 3 workshops in my life, and I have just found that I am not a teacher. And it comes also from my wife. She is, and she's a great teacher. And she would, she's like, so what are you going to teach? And do you have notes? And I didn't know what she was talking about. I was like, I'm just going to go and wing it and give them what I know. And I feel like I operate so much on intuition that I just can't teach it,
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So, if I were going to ask you to teach it, which I know you're not going to do, but for the benefit of the people who are listening to this, who look at your work, admire your work, and say, he's got something special, he's got a superpower, how would you articulate how you go about your creating that superpower? Is it mostly in this is a bad question, I think. I was going to say mostly in composition, or, you see, I don't know, there's something about your compositions that it feels like you leave more space in than a lot of people do. And I'm not sure if that's really true universally or just the things I've been looking at.
Right.
What do you go through when you go out and you set up? What are you thinking? What are you doing? What's your process like?
Well, I think I want to, my outdoor paintings, although, I started out painting a lot outside, my outdoor paintings are different from my studio paintings now, where my outdoor paintings are much more what I like to call exercise, just going out, seeing the value, seeing the colors, and I doing very little composing, very little drawing, and mostly just focusing on those elements and then trying to capture what I see. And so then in the studio, it'd be much more, I guess, how I put a painting together. And I think I always, when I'm looking either, I paint some from memory, some from ideas, and then look for subject matter through my photo reference that I have, or some are straight from the photo reference I have. And then I figure out how to edit that to say what I am feeling or what I think is a strength in that scene, or what captured my attention. And it could be a color scheme, it could be big shapes, it could be I guess the emotion, it could be a good composition, it could be sometimes they're subject matter driven. Like if I want to paint a ranch scene or a big skyscape, then that would be more subject matter driven. But then I would decide what I want to leave out to make it successful. And see, that's where the intuition comes in. If anyone asks me, why would you leave that out? And I might have a couple reasons, but nothing, no book knowledge on that.
Well, I think that's an important thing for a lot of people to hear because editing while you're working is really important because, even though nature is perfect, it may not be a perfect composition.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I found very difficult to do outside and still do is that tree's there and you don't want it there. And then you make a decision to move it. And then where do you move it? Is it all the way out? Is it further to the left? And so these things, I might have a reason. My reason would be it just feels better there rather than, some compositional diagram. So I think outside, I find it more difficult to compose because of that. You're staring at that tree, it's there, and you're fighting yourself the whole time to not put it in there, but it's not going to make a better painting. So then that's why I've kind of abandoned composition a little bit outside because it's not what I'm aiming at when I'm painting out.
So when you're taking, let's say you're painting a scene and you're just kind of putting everything in, and then are you going to take that study back in and turn that into a painting, a studio painting, or are you going to take pieces of that and use a piece from one painting and a piece from another to create a composition? Or are you just doing it for, as you said, exercise?
It is mostly exercise, and sometimes I have made larger paintings from outdoor sketch, or sometimes, yeah, color schemes, but it is more just keeping the skills sharp. And I find that the time I'm setting up outside is very rarely the time. Like, time has just been an issue for us lately. We have two kids and have a house that we're working on and things like that. So I think my time outside has shifted a little bit to, I don't want to be set up the last 20 minutes of light. I'd rather get some photo reference that I could use later. So so I'm not painting outside when the light is absolutely going off.
Well, a lot of painters, you can tell a vast difference between their plein air work and their work based on photographs. And I was flipping through your website, and I'm not getting that feeling at all. You clearly can see the influence of plein air painting because
Thank you.
it's really informing your work because it feels as if you were out there doing it in nature.
Well, thanks. And I do. That's what I'm saying about the exercises. I think that just keeps the skills sharp, and when not to trust the photo. And I think photography's gotten a lot better. But I am certainly not copying the photo by any means. There's hopefully a lot of my soul in those paintings. But I think I painted outside exclusively for at least the first 6-7 years, and nothing in the studio, rather than a couple touch-ups here and there. Especially if I was trying to get more than $150 for a 9x12, I get $200 for 1620. But so then I think it was just those years out, and I also think that painting out in Oregon for those first 6 years, you really learned to see subtlety. I mean, it was gray on gray with some green in there.
Right. You weren't going out and finding a scene that had three or more values. It was kind of all blended together, I'd imagine.
Right. And then when I was out there doing it, I would just paint. I would just drive around and look for something to paint, and just whatever type of day it was. If it was raining, I'm still painting, and so I think it was just a great place to cut my teeth.
So let's translate that into a lesson for the people listening to this.
Right, that was the question you're asking. Lessons.
Yeah, because I think that I've told this story many times on the podcast, but I had a Russian master visiting my house, and he walked into my studio and he pointed to 3 paintings. He said, "You did those 3 outdoors, the rest you did from photographs." And I'm
Wow.
like, how did he know? He was right. And of course, now I can do that, and I couldn't do it with your work because yours looks like it was all inspired by being on location. But it's that time out. So talk to people about what you think their process maybe should be if they're considering painting or if they're kind of going through their learning stages.
Well, I think absolutely painting from life, especially when you're learning, is just so helpful. I mean, you can see there's things you can't see with a photo. I mean, you can't see 3 dimensions. You can't see how a form turns, and then the atmospheric perspective, I think, is a little less, and just the richness of color or the grayness of color. It just there's those subtleties in the gray. I just don't think you're going to pick up. So I just think it is important to paint from life, or at least to learn that way, and exclusively from photos. You can tell, like you're talking about, I can tell the artists that have been painting from photos the whole time. I think they're also attracted to more detail, maybe because the detail's all right there rather than a suggestion.
So how do you get to the point where you can you can make those kinds of decisions? Is it just about brush time, or was there a moment when you said, my colors are too garish, I got to gray them down? Was there a moment when you kind of started moving in this direction of being a little bit more subtle and keeping some of the detail out?
I think it's a constant fine tuning, and it is being, you really need to look at your work, and we're all our own worst critic. And so you need to be a little bit gentle with that, but it's also, you need to look at it. And I've always kind of envied artists that thought they did a great job every time. I was like, man, I wish I had that just a little bit. But I think you need to constantly evaluate, and sometimes I'm evaluating as I'm painting. Sometimes I can see something a year ago, and I'll have a more clear picture of what happened with that painting, whether it was good or bad. Or typically I'm not as happy with them when they leave the studio, and then I see them a year later and I think, well, that wasn't all that bad. I don't know what I was thinking, but I think maybe I feel the struggle, or when I'm painting it, there's just always a little bit of struggle, a little bit of tension, and maybe not always meeting what was in my head.
Now, you have had what I would consider to be a lot of success in certain areas. For instance, you have been in the Prix de West, which is a highly important, significant Western art show, and it's very hard as an artist to get into something like that. First off, how did that come about? How long have you been doing it?
The show is actually next week. It'll be my 10th year in the show, and it was, I applied for a lot of years and got a lot of rejection letters, and I never took that like as a criticism. I don't want to be in a show until I'm ready to be in a show, and so I think that was a good thing. And I think, I'm not sure, it probably had something to do with some artist friends that were mentoring me, and John and Terry Moyers. I was up painting in Canada with them quite a bit, and I'm pretty sure, they never told me this, but I'm pretty sure they had something to do with it.
Doesn't hurt.
No. So they suggest my name, and then I think, you get maybe a couple years as a guest artists, or so the first couple of years you have two paintings in the show, and I think they're trying you out. So that's the time to really make sure you do your best.
Well, 10 years, that's a great run. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean, it's I've heard stories from artists who spent 20 years trying to get into it, and some, of course, never have. So that's pretty remarkable.
Well, and
So,
really, I don't know. I mean, when you say that I've had a lot of successes, I have, and I have really nothing but gratitude. I have no idea really how anyone could follow the same path or do the same thing. I know there's so many great artists out there that haven't had those opportunities, and it's just I don't think has to do totally with skill or with the finished product. I don't know. It's a combination of things maybe, but I feel fortunate for sure.
so what is there a like a big goal, something I'm sure that was a big goal, but is there something that you've really dreamed about that hasn't yet happened that you really want to have happen?
No, it's funny. I've been asked the goal question before, and I
Darn,
don't
I
know.
thought I was the only one.
No, but it's just my answer is, and I don't know if it's totally true, but I don't think I've set a goal in my life really. And I think I've just followed opportunities as they come and then decide which ones to take or not to take. And I mean, as far as a goal, maybe just to keep getting better, but that is so elusive, and so I mean, there's nothing to grab onto there at all. But just making sure that I'm doing the best I can and not sitting back and saying this is what I do, this is how I do it, and it should be good from here on out. I I so admire so many artists, and that if and so I'm always looking like, man, if I could do something like that, then I'd feel good. But I know you wouldn't. I know those artists are struggling too. So
What is your process of trying to better yourself?
um, trying different ideas, trying ideas that I don't think I can pull off, but I feel it's a strong enough idea that I have to try. Um, Not giving up on paintings that I know are close, but just need some flash of inspiration to fix. Um, and then I haven't done it lately, but even setting up some still lifes, trying something different to work on my drawing skills. And I just keeping an open mind. I think that a long time ago I developed I get an idea pop into my head and say, I can't do that. I can't do that. But then I just developed the attitude of, or the question is, why not? Why can't you do that? And so then just try. And then if it fails, so what? There's lots of failures. So,
Well, that's where the learning comes from.
right, right.
Absolutely.
And I just think it would be, I don't really know what people would say was one of my successful paintings, and it might be easy to rest on that. And it's like we were talking about before, as far as a formula, that I just think that the formulas, you're not going to grow that way. And I feel like every time I step up to the easel to do a painting, it is I wouldn't want to say it's such a struggle, but there's a lot of struggles in there. And without those struggles, I mean, I think that the struggles probably show that I'm on the right track. I mean, if I knew how to solve every problem on every painting, it means that I've already been there and I'm not interested in doing that. At least when I come up with the idea. When I'm on the struggle, maybe I'm interested in knowing what I'm doing. It's like, I wish I knew how to do this. I don't know if that made sense, but
Yeah, it makes sense completely. So we like to we try in the podcast to get some painting tips,
yep.
and since you're an anti-formula guy, this is going to be a little tougher. But clearly, you know what you're doing. So, what would you say would your top 3 painting tips be, and elaborate on them?
Okay, well, I think to paint one idea would be important. I think, especially when you're out, you could be excited about the sky and then the light hitting this tree trunk and then also the reflection of the sky. And that'd be a good example. You don't want to paint the sky and the reflection of the sky of equal importance. I think just a one idea painting, I mean, I always joke that it's like it has a rainbow, unicorn, and a howling wolf. You don't want all that. So it's you want to just one idea, and that's going to say way more than if you put three ideas in there. You're
Boy, and
just going to
that
confuse.
is really tempting, though, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
because you like all of those elements, and so do you pull them out? Do you downplay them? Do you darken the things that are a little less important? What would your process be there?
I think some of it would be, yeah, it would be change. You could change the value. I think I would do it with the way I compose the painting. So if I'm excited about the sky, then the horizon's really low. Or if I'm excited about the trees, or the tree line, something like that, then I'll make sure that that is the focal point, either with values or color. I mean, it'll be there in front of you anyway, but it is just editing. And I think that you can just tell yourself, I'll do the sky later, or I'll do, just go with what you're excited about the most, and there'll be other skies. So
So that what you're saying is the thing that you're excited about the most is the thing you should attack first.
yeah, as far as, or the idea you should paint, I think the one you're excited about the most. You could say, I really love the light on that cliff, but look at that towering thunderhead, and it's say, well, which one am I more excited about, or it could be which one's going to go away first, or because the light's changing, or which one do I think is going to be the most successful, or would say the most about the area I'm painting.
Okay, so I'm just going to play devil's advocate to somebody who's listening right now who's saying, "Yeah, but why not put the thunderhead and the light on the cliff in there?" What happens to a painting when you do that?
It confuses the viewer. I don't think, I mean, there's certainly a way you could do it where you could downplay the light on the cliff and really play up the thunderhead. But I think you really want to know what the painting's about. Just like I mean, if you compare it to a film, there could be a film with lots of sub stories, but you would have an overarching, theme in the movie or story in the movie. And I think that's what you want. You just want something you don't have a lot of time to catch the viewer when they first look at the painting. You want to show them, well, I don't know, I could devil advocate myself on that one too, but I think you want an initial impact that grabs you, but then you want enough to hold you there. You don't want to be just 3 seconds and you're done. Although we're so accustomed to that now with social media, right?
Right.
If you got 3 seconds viewing on a computer, that's amazing.
Now, do you always try things like trying to lead the eye in or lead the eye around where you want them to go?
I do, yes. And that could be, so there are methods for that. It could be directionals, it could be light and dark, it could be a path. I mean, I have a lot of roads in a lot of my paintings, and that's an obvious path in, or a river is a great lead in with some perspective.
So you talked about directionals. That's a term that some people might not understand. You want to articulate that?
Well, and maybe other people have different definitions, but as far as for me, it could be like if you want to go back into the painting and it's near, you're following the path and it's going towards the edge. If you have a branch branch of a tree pointing the direction you want to go, or you change the angle of the skyline of the mountain, or the angle of the cloud to direct you around, then I just think I in general think of keeping the eye moving around, and probably in the way we read from left to right.
Yeah, I actually know somebody who draws arrows. Well, they do an initial sketch and they draw arrows in terms of where they want the direction of the eye to go, and then they try to invent things to essentially accomplish those arrows. So it might be a tree branch or some other such thing.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a bad idea. And I've put moved a telephone pole or something in a painting to stop you from going further over, and then that would be a clear directional back down to the bottom or something like that. But I don't think that's a bad idea at all. And I do think, and then part of where the intuition kicks in is to know, whoa, my eye's slipping off the side of the painting, and why is that? And you'll say, well, it's because of that high contrast or that big bright patch of color, or there's too much detail over there. And that's where the intuition comes in. But maybe that could be taught, but certainly not by me.
Well, I think that it's real easy to fall in love with things. You implement something. I remember the other day my wife came in and she said, "Don't mess with those trees. Those trees are perfect. The best trees you've ever done."
No pressure, Eric.
And it's like, but they were screwing up the composition, so
Right.
I immediately scraped them out. But you fall in love with stuff that you do from time to time, so it's very difficult to make those decisions.
Right. And it took me years to get over that, where I would say I would never be able to paint that again. The way I painted that, I have to leave it. And now it's whatever is going to make the painting better. And if that means scraping off 2 days work, that's what that means. And I just think it's another thing that I've developed and I use to tell myself, because I could have a painting on the easel and it's not going well. I come into the house and maybe I'm not the most pleasant guy to be around because that's just bugging me. And then I tell myself I can fix it. And so that's my attitude, is that I can fix it. And part of that is being willing to get rid of whatever is causing the problem, or totally change the painting in one area to make it a better painting, a more successful painting.
So you were talking about top 3 tips. Your first one was paint a single idea. What's
Right.
your second one?
This is something I learned from the Moyers too. And, watching John Moyers paint, he paints so decisively and it's just a joy to watch. And I think that I learned that from them, is just be decisive. You put down that brush stroke like you mean it. And if you're painting timidly, it's going to show. And even in soft, quiet paintings, you can be decisive. And then it goes back to what I say, that I can fix it. If I am decisive and then later learn that that was the wrong decision, then I'm going to be decisive in fixing it. So it's just, it's painting like you know what you're doing, even though maybe you don't know totally what you're doing. How's that? Is that a rule? I don't know.
Yeah, well, you get to make your own rules, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
All right, and then what's your third tip?
I think just getting ideas from everywhere, and have a lot of artistic influences in whatever you're interested in, landscape or figures or sculpting, whatever. But also I get a lot of ideas from books. I listen to a lot of books on tape when I'm painting. I get ideas from music. I get ideas from going to Target with the family. You look at a beautiful rug and say, look at that color combination. I would love to do something like that, and just bring it into your own medium. So I just think being open to ideas, and they don't have to come all from visuals.
And if you get stuck, let's say you're really struggling with something, you can't figure out how to get around it. Will you go and start flipping through art books to see how an artist in the past may have dealt with a similar problem, or is that the kiss of death?
No, I do that a lot, and I don't think it gets to a point of imitation for me, because I'll have an idea, a painting in mind that I've seen in one of the books, and I'll look through it and I'll say, let's see how he solved that. And every time, then I'll eventually just start looking through and look how beautiful this is. And every time I get to a point where I just say, I'm the artist, I get to do it how I want to do it. And the way that this artist achieved that was because they were doing the same thing. They're doing the way they wanted to do it. And so I basically just walk away from the art books just saying, just get to it and do it the way you do it. But just, I guess, it's giving myself permission to be my own artist, so that's what I get to every time, is that maybe it takes a little more observation on this painting. Maybe I need to, look at what is really the truth or the essence of what I'm painting. Or, I think of often, what are the characteristics of the scene? What is the characteristic of this tree? Or so then it just might lead me to more observation, but also just leads me to giving myself permission to be who I am. So I don't know if maybe the whole thing is only getting away from the painting for a half an hour or something, and then it's more obvious. I don't know, but I am often stuck, and usually I go to the art books.
So in terms of art books, are there artists that you found especially influential in your work?
Yeah, and I don't know necessarily if my work looks like the artist that I really like or am influenced by, but the Taoist Society of Artists have been huge for me, Ernest Blumenschein in particular. The first art book I think I ever saw was Tom Thompson book, Tom Thompson and the Group of Seven,
Yeah.
and Edgar Payne, Maynard Dixon. I love a lot of the Russians. Who else? I look at Rockwell Kent. I like his a lot. And then there's some artists that I don't think I'd ever paint like, but I am really influenced by, and that's Giovanni Segantini. What he did on a canvas was witchcraft, if you ask me. But
Well, I think it's interesting that Rockwell Kent was one that you mentioned. You know, a lot of the ones that you mentioned, Blumenschein and Carlson and so on. You know, we hear a lot of those a lot. Segantini, I don't hear that much, and Kent, I never hear. And interestingly enough, you know, I do this painting event up in the Adirondacks, which will have passed by the time this airs. But we always go to Rockwell Kent's farm, and
cool.
And his studio is there back in the woods, and we go back in there, and there's still some paintings hanging up, and because he was, it was almost more abstract in his work than some of the artists that you mentioned. The fabulous little museum up that way that's got a bunch of his work, but it's not somebody that you hear about a lot. I was curious about that.
Yeah, I think I'm just drawn to his design, and I like that he went to Greenland and Tierra del Fuego, and he gets this sense of place. And I like painting rocks and ice too, but maybe that's part of it. But I think it is just that he trusted his voice. There's a little bit of naivete in his work. You know, you'll see a halo around a mountain or this just way too dark sky, and sometimes looks like painted on canvas that would be you get at the craft store. And I think I admire that. I think it just shows that you don't need technical proficiency to be an expressive artist or someone who, you know, contributes to the art world with a vision. And I think, not to say that he definitely not an academic painter, right? I mean,
he had the ability. I mean, if you see his illustration work and his drawings, he certainly had the academic understanding.
Right. But then at some point abandoned that, and there's a lot of people that have done that too. And so I just think that's that elusiveness of what is art. And if you think you're going to solve it by just becoming more technically proficient, maybe you're just going to make a more technically proficient painting that has nothing to say. I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you a quick little story.
Yeah.
I was hosting a cocktail party at some mansion in Palm Beach during the Palm Beach Art Show about, 10 or 15 years ago probably. And our guest of honor was the director of the Hermitage Museum in Russia. Wow. And so he and I got talking, and I said, tell me about your favorite artist. He spoke perfect English. He said, my favorite artist in the world is Rockwell Kent. And of course, Kent was a communist and went over to Russia and did a lot of shows in Russia. I had just the week before had been in a bookstore, and there was a signed Rockwell Kent illustration book. And so I slipped away, and I called my wife real quick. I said, run over to that store and buy that book and FedEx it to me so I can give it to him tomorrow. So I did.
Cool.
And he went nuts. And so last year when our fine art trip went to Russia, he greeted us, and he met me in his office at the Hermitage, and he said, I have a surprise for you. He says, I know you're a fan of Rockwell Kent. I said, yes, I am. He said, I've mounted a show for you. And he says,
wow.
He said, come with me. And he took me upstairs, took me and Peter Trippi upstairs through all these galleries in the Hermitage. And there were security guards. It wasn't open yet. And he said, this show will open next week. He said, but I did this for you because I know you like him. And we pulled out a bunch of Rockwell Kents from our collection. And so they hung a show of about 10 or 12 fabulous Rockwell Kent paintings in the Hermitage, which was just a wonderful experience.
I can't imagine. Yeah, I read that too, that he gave all those paintings to Russia, and I kind of shook my head and thought, wow, that's kind of a jerky thing to do, with the country that supported you your whole life buying your artwork, and then you do that. But that's what made him an artist, I guess.
Yeah, well, he
Definitely
was.
a quirky thing to do.
Yeah, he was a quirky guy and a unique character. A lot of the people that are in the Adirondacks around his house knew him and tell stories about him. And he would he walk out in the winter wearing a kilt and walk out in bare feet in the snow to get the mail in the middle of the night, drunk, and he would fall asleep in the snow, and a lot of stories like that.
Definitely played the artist card a lot. Like, oh, he's an artist. Yep,
So,
I can tell.
so tell us more about Segantini, because again, that's not one I hear about very much. Is he Italian? I don't think I knew the artist.
I think he is, and I think it's Italian. I think some of the books I have, it must be Italian. And he painted. They must be the Italian Alps, and he painted in a way. I don't know who. There was another artist that talked about it that was influenced by him, also a deceased artist, but they call it the Segantini weave. So if you look at his paintings, they look almost woven. Lots of little brush strokes, horizontal brush strokes, but it has this amazing vibration of light and texture and depth. And one of the books I have of his, I think there was one that came out maybe 5 years ago, and it's just fantastic. And this guy, I mean, you talk about a crazy artist. You look at him, he looks nuts. But he had this whole setup outside in the winter in this massive canvas, and he built something to block the wind and everything. It looked like he had a black canvas and just started doing these white hash marks and kind of giving an outline of the composition with that, and then built on top of that. And like I said, it looks like witchcraft to me because I don't have any idea. I saw how he started it, but I don't know how he got to the end product because they're really high key and just full of light and life. And then some of them are really, I mean, he must have some spiritual meaning behind some of those, and they're just haunting.
Well, I have to check him out. That's fascinating.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
So if there was one painting that somebody said, I'll grant you one painting that you can own, what's that painting going to be?
That's really tough. I know that I don't think many people can answer that question. There's so many, but I just have, and it changes a little bit time to time. But it's amazing to me also how it hasn't changed. I still look at a Tom Thompson and just think, man, that is brilliant, amazing. So I don't think there's any one, and I guess I'm always just out there looking for the next one that's going to blow me away.
Well, I'll be anxious to hear about the next one from you. Well, Josh, this has been just a real treasure to spend time with you on the podcast and to get to know you a little bit. You're really a fabulous painter, and I marvel at your work. And I think
that's so nice of you to say, Eric. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're a man that's way ahead of his time in terms of the ability that you have, and I'm just so honored to get to know you a little bit.
I feel the same, Eric. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to meeting you in person someday.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll go painting.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'll come up to Helena.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I said it right.
Welcome. Yeah, you did. You're welcome anytime.
All right. Well, thanks again for being on the PleinAir podcast.
Okay. Thank you so much, Eric.
Well, thanks again to Josh Elliott. Really a great honor to have him on the show. What do you say we do some marketing stuff?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
Well, in the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your questions, and you can always email me questions, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Tell me your name and where you're from. Most people just say their name, and they don't say where they're from, and then I just say, like, here's Nancy Crawford, but it doesn't say where Nancy's from. Nancy says, how do I turn likes into sales? Well, Nancy, there's not an easy answer, but let me try. First, a lot of people believe the promise of social media is the end-all be-all for selling, but so far it hasn't come true for most people. Some people, yes, not most people. You have to use the same disciplines in all marketing, whether you're marketing on Facebook, whether you're marketing on social media, Instagram, or whether you're doing magazine or other types of advertising. There's certain disciplines which I teach in my art marketing courses, and you got to follow those disciplines no matter what, otherwise it won't work for you. But if you want it to work well, you need to treat it like a business. You got to do certain amounts of posting regularly, daily, depending on Facebook or Instagram. Instagram, the ideal is 2 a day. Facebook is 3 a day. You got to spread them out to the right day parts. And you need to be, in both cases, engaging. That means when somebody comments or likes, you got to engage them. You got to talk to them. And it's not a 2 or 3 word engagement, and it's not a copy and paste engagement or an automated engagement, because you will get penalized for those things. You got to actually engage and talk to them and have a dialogue. Engagement is everything. When you get a like, why not say, hey, thanks for the like. Tell me what you like about the painting, and start a dialogue, and then maybe you can use that dialogue as an opportunity to say, hey, by the way, if you'd be interested in owning this painting, I'd be willing to part with it. I wouldn't start out that way, because that might be a little bit too much too soon, but certainly you can dialogue and then kind of move into that. And that's how I do it. And by the way, I just sold 3 paintings by doing that, so I think it's very effective. 3 paintings to the same person. Here's a question from Sally Jameson. Again, Sally didn't say your name. Sally, you got to do that. Not sure where she's from. She says, watercolor has a stigma and does not sell as well as oil. What should I do to sell more? Well, Sally, I'm not sure that stigma is still true. It kind of used to be true, might be true with some galleries. I know a lot of watercolor artists who are making great livings, making really a lot of money, selling a lot of paintings, and they do what I do. You know, they stand in the river where the money is flowing. That's my saying that I always talk about, is you go where the money's flowing, find out where watercolor paintings are selling and be there. Spend time where watercolor is embraced and not shunned. Be where the people who are buying it are paying attention. You know, there are galleries that move a lot of watercolor. There's some that don't believe in watercolor. Be in the ones that believe in watercolor. And also, you've got to ask yourself, is this a story and is it true? Or is this a limiting belief and am I making it true? So the limiting belief might be that watercolor has a stigma. If you were a watercolor artist, I don't recommend switching to oil to sell more paintings, because your heart won't be in it. Your heart is what sells paintings. Your heart has to be in it. Anyway, I hope this has been helpful marketing information. Hey, a reminder to get your seat to the PleinAir convention, which is moving really the fastest of any in art history. PleinAirconvention.com is where you go. Also, if you're interested in our fine art trip to Provence and then on to Edinburgh, check out finearttrip.com. It's not a painting trip, but it's a great behind-the-scenes tour, and we do some painting. Some of us go out and paint. Anyway, that's at finearttrip.com. Also, if you've not seen my blog on Sunday mornings, I'd love for you to check it out. I just kind of talk about philosophy and life. A lot of people are reading it, getting it forwarded to them. The people are not even artists who are reading it, but they're having a good time with it. I call it Sunday Coffee, and I write it Sunday mornings in the back porch when I'm there. And so you can learn more about it. It's free. It's coffeewitheric.com. That's where you sign up to get it for free. It'll come to you automatically. I love doing it. It's a lot of fun. This is also a lot of fun. I love doing the podcast. You know, like I said many, many times, I used to be in radio, and so I kind of like doing this. I like interviewing people, getting into their hearts and their souls and getting to know them. And I also would encourage you to email me. A lot of people do. They tell me who they would like to see me interview. And by the way, it doesn't have to be an artist. It could be something to do with our PleinAir world. So email me, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. And my name, Eric Rhodes. I'm the publisher and the founder of PleinAir Magazine. And you and me, we're all part of this booming plein air movement. I think Jean Stern says this is the largest movement in the history of art. So we're all very happy to be a part of this. Let's keep it strong and healthy and alive. So that means getting other people to paint, telling people about PleinAir Magazine, and remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhodes. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.